All right, it's D-Day. It's DeMeco Day. DeMeco Ryans interviewing with the Houston Texans today. Sean Payton has been all the talk. There's reports that maybe the Saints want 2 first-round picks. One of the silliest things that I've heard in a long time. John Gruden was 30 years younger than Sean Payton. He was still in the game. He had just brought a team nearly to the Super Bowl, had it not been for Tony Siragusa falling on Rich Gannon. And Tampa Bay was a coach away as well. They were close to getting there. With Tony Dungy, had it not been for the Bert Emanuel catch. So 2 firsts for Payton, ridiculous. 1 was actually pretty ridiculous, but now 2, that's a little bit ridiculous. And I think we're ignoring the questions that come with Sean Payton and just assuming the best is yet to come. It is the locker room. It is D-Day. This is the top source for Texans digital content. You can hear me Monday through Friday, 10 to 2 on Sports Radio 610, the home of the Texans. And on the Odyssey app, we're always critical when necessary. We get players, we get coaches, we get ownership, and we bring it to you here in the locker room. Appreciate all the people who've subscribed. We've been doing this for a few months, and it's already been going very, very well, and it's only going to get better as the most exciting, most important offseason in franchise history continues. So subscribe would be much appreciated. But we're going to focus all on D-Day. DeMeco Ryans. Let's go through the pros and cons of DeMeco Ryans, who for a long time has kind of been the people's choice. And there was always chatter with the state of the Texans organization the last couple of years and what had gone on as to whether or not they would even realistically have a chance to hire DeMeco Ryans. And as the list came out early on, there were some intriguing names on there, but you never really knew whether or not DeMeco Ryans was going to interview for the gig. There was a weird report that he wasn't. The job wasn't even open when that report came out, so I never really understood that. And if you lay out the assets, you take into account that Andre Johnson's a big part of the organization, and you know what Andre Johnson thinks of DeMeco Ryans, or Cap, as him and Arian Foster and his old teammates call him. It just seemed like it would make sense for DeMeco to at least interview, which is what he's going to do today. You heard about a lawsuit from the past. That was about the playing surface. That wasn't like suing the Houston Texans. That wasn't like a Brian Flores lawsuit or something like that. So that was never going to be an obstacle. But DeMeco does have options. He is going to interview with the Indianapolis Colts. He's actually the betting favorite right now to be the Indianapolis Colts coach for whatever reason. Now, why would you take the Indy job over the Texans job? I'm not sure. Both of them have question marks, but if you just lay out the assets and the history and all that type of stuff, the Texans would make sense. But does it make sense for the Texans? It's very easy to get lost in the prestige and history. And that's where we'll start as we talk about the strengths of DeMeco Ryans and the intrigue, the prestige and the history. It's easy to get lost in this. And who doesn't love a good story of a player returning to where he played and doing his thing? There's been a few of those over the course of history, and sometimes they go well and sometimes they don't. Last year, the Jacksonville Jaguars, their fans might not want to admit it now, and I'm not going to generalize all of them, but I will say a large chunk and a large portion of Jacksonville Jaguar fans were pro bring back Byron Leftwich, bring Byron Leftwich home. And we were actually doing a Twitter Spaces back when Twitter Spaces wasn't tacky. And we changed the title in the middle of the Spaces because Peterson got hired. And those of you that don't know what a Twitter Spaces is, basically a chat room. But we changed it to the title to Doug Peterson hired by Jags. And next thing we knew, there were 800, 900 Jags fans in the chat. Former wide receiver Jimmy Smith was in there. There was all kinds of former players. And the overwhelming majority of Jags fans were pissed off because they weren't bringing home Byron Leftwich. Now, Byron Leftwich since has been fired as offensive coordinator for the Tampa Bay Bucks. You can blame Tom Brady or whatever, but the offense wasn't good, and people who follow that team didn't like what they saw. And the most important thing is Doug Peterson's done a hell of a job. He just won a playoff game. First playoff game they've won since 2017. They have the quarterback. They did a good job of evaluating players. They brought in, some pass catchers that a lot of people kind of just, skimmed over and thought maybe they overpaid for. But all three of those guys, Christian Kirk, Zay Jones, and Evan Ingram, they had career years. And Jacksonville's playing in Kansas City this weekend with the chance to go to the conference championship. So I say all that to say sometimes you can want something and you can want, the history. You want to have that feeling. You want that novelty. And sometimes it's not what's in the best interest of things. I remember the Raiders would do it quite often. They would bring back former Raiders, how they tried to do it with John Gruden. Bring him home, bring Chucky home. He just got away. It didn't go well. Might've been some other factors. But the point is, sometimes you can get blinded by prestige and history, and ignore other potential good hires, which the Texans have a lot of good potential hires. I will say though, and this is the one thing that I do think needs to be taken into account. In this city, I think prestige, history, and connection with fans matters. And if DeMeco Ryans is the coach for 4 years, 3 years, and it doesn't work out, you're not going to lose fans because of that. As a matter of fact, I think fans are going to be very, very excited by that because there is apathy. There are trust issues. And bringing in DeMeco here and maybe the prestige and history mattering a little bit more in other cities, not saying that should be the case, but it could be the case. But I also don't want to sell DeMeco Ryans short because I think DeMeco Ryans, he's number one on my list, and he has been even before it looked like Sean Payton was going for a money grab, and the Saints front office apparently has been on Bourbon Street too long, and they think that he's John Gruden when Gruden was 30 years younger with that type of buzz and that type of value. The overall resume of DeMeco Ryans is what's intriguing. Now, there are questions, which we'll get to because we are breaking down the DeMeco Ryans resume on D-Day. DeMeco Ryans going to interview with the Texans. But we'll start when as we talk about the strengths, the best education from the best pipeline. DeMeco Ryans played with the Texans. He was a 2-time Pro Bowler. He was a first-team All-Pro in his second year. And everyone on that team looked at him as a leader. Everybody. They call him Cap. It's not like after the fact where you say that guy was a leader. Like, he was called Cap. It was his team. He was the leader. He was involved in everything. He was walking around. He oversaw everything. And if you ask guys that played with him, they could immediately tell you, whether it's Arian Foster, whether it's Andre Johnson, whether it's Wade Smith, they would tell you, yeah, you could tell that he was probably going to be a coach someday. And while he was here, there was someone else who was here for a while named Kyle Shanahan, who was on the offensive staff. And Kyle Shanahan was here for a few years. He went on to do good things in Washington. He did some pretty good things in Cleveland. And then he did his best work in Atlanta with the Falcons, where the Falcons had the big lead down the street in the Super Bowl, and finally got his first opportunity to be a head coach. And he went to San Francisco. And when he went to San Francisco, DeMeco Ryans had been out of the league for, I think, a year or two. And Kyle Shanahan remembered the presence that DeMeco Ryans had with the Houston Texans. And he wanted to bring DeMeco Ryans to be on his coaching staff. And that's what he's done. And since then, many Kyle Shanahan offspring disciples from the Shanahan tree, whether it's Sean McVay, whether it's LaFleur, like guys you can connect, they've gone on to have a lot of success. And guys who've actually been in San Francisco, Robert Saleh, Mike McDaniel, they've gone on to have success as well. And that's the education that DeMeco Ryans has been getting this entire time. And if you hear Kyle Shanahan talk about him, he says that DeMeco's ready. DeMeco Ryans stayed an extra year to kind of soak in and get more experience. He's looking at how things function, and it's one of the best pipelines, and it's a guy who always has seemed destined to coach. So as far as education, you have a defensive guy in Saleh going and getting the gig, and then you have the offensive guy McDaniel going and getting a gig. And you have DeMeco Ryans, who's just been soaking all this up the entire time. So that adds some intrigue. And oh, by the way, I know they got some dogs out there, but he's overseeing one of the best defenses, and all the guys on that defense from Nick Bosa on down, they talk about how much they admire DeMeco Ryans as a leader. And the most important thing to me is, because defensive players are always going to talk good about their coaches, but Nick Bosa and others say he's just kind of grown. Now, they're not saying that he was David Culley or something like that, but they're saying that he's just grown and gotten better at it, which was his goal when he came back. Like that's the one thing that Nick Bosa has said, is that there's just been constant improvement, and that desire to improvement, those leadership intangibles, the education he's getting, the guys that he's been around with Kyle Shanahan. That's one of the main things about DeMeco Ryans. And it all goes to that cliche, hit the cliche bell, the it factor. And that's what he's got. He's got the best education. He's got success. He's got a good resume. He's got an it factor. And he's got the education with one of the most respected coaches in the league, and a guy who does a really good job of getting his guys gigs and creating other opportunities in Kyle Shanahan. Now, the negative, and this is the negative that you'll hear the most about DeMeco Ryans, and I think it's valid, because I think negatives need to be addressed. Do they need to be the end-all, be-all? No, but they need to be addressed. And I actually think when we talk about Sean Payton, we don't talk enough about the negative. We just assume this guy's going to come here, he's going to win Super Bowls. Would you pay a 12 for a Super Bowl? I mean, take a step back. Sean Payton has had Drew Brees for 16 years. Drew Brees was already a Pro Bowl quarterback, by the way, when Sean Payton got him. I know Sean Payton did a good job with Drew Brees. They did an excellent job, but Drew Brees was a Pro Bowl quarterback. Like, he'd been to the Pro Bowl. So let's not act like he just drafted Drew Brees as a project. Drew Brees went at the top of the second round. He was already a Pro Bowl quarterback. Now, San Diego decided to go with Phillip Rivers. Okay, but Drew Brees, there was questions about the shoulder. Nick Saban said no. He goes to New Orleans, but he'd already been a Pro Bowl quarterback. So let's make that clear. Sean Payton does not have a large sample size of success without Drew Brees. He left New Orleans in a pretty bad shape, cap-wise and asset-wise, in large part because of his doing. So is he going to come in and all of a sudden it's just going to start clicking? I think there's questions about Sean Payton as well, and how long is he going to be committed to it? I'm saying all that because I do think we need to focus on the why nots and the negatives. And it seems like every other coach gets it, but with Sean Payton, it's just a romanticism thing. It's like a honeymoon phase for a Super Bowl, however the hell long ago. And we ignore that things are a little bit different. He's, however, 20 years older. He doesn't have Drew Brees. It's not the same situation. So I do think that does at least matter. Now, with DeMeco, the question that comes up is he's a defensive-minded coach. And you have 7 of 8 guys remaining in the playoffs that are offensive-minded. How much does that matter? Is that a coincidence? Is that a sign of ownership and stuff, just, maybe leaning towards offensive guys? Is it just as simple as you find the quarterback? Like, would Zach Taylor be Zach Taylor without Joe Burrow? With Sean McDermott, who's the one defensive-minded coach, is the reason that he's able to counter stuff is because of Josh Allen? I think you can make a case that that's the case. So we sit here and we look at this and we say, these are offensive-minded coaches, and that's why they're there. But if you find the quarterback, I think you're going to be okay. Like, that's the problem with the Jets, right? Like, Robert Saleh, another one of DeMeco Ryans' mentors. And man, if you hear Robert Saleh talk about DeMeco Ryans, good God, you want to talk about love. But if the Jets had Trevor Lawrence instead of Zach Wilson, do you think there's a chance that the Jets might be playing this weekend? Is it possible? Like, if they trade for Aaron Rodgers, are we going to be sitting there saying Robert Saleh is a defensive coach? When Bill Belichick had Tom Brady and not Mac Jones, were we questioning that Bill Belichick was a defensive-minded coach? I think it matters. I mean, the Tennessee Titans, Ryan Tannehill, nobody's going to say that Ryan Tannehill is God's gift to quarterbacks, but they were in the mix when they had Ryan Tannehill. Now you take away Ryan Tannehill, all of a sudden they kind of struggled a little bit. They had Malik Willis and Dobbs. So you question that. Mike Tomlin, when he had Big Ben, they were in this position all the time. So we can simplify it and we can say, well, you need an offensive-minded coach. And I'm not disagreeing with it. I do think it's a trend that's worthy of looking at. But is it that these guys are offensive-minded, or is it just as simple as these guys got good quarterbacks? I will say, though, if you look at the game Saturday night, Nick Sirianni, who has done a hell of a job with the Eagles, and Brian Dable, who has done a hell of a job with the Giants, Daniel Jones and Jalen Hurts, nobody was, anticipating those guys being in these games. But, we simplify this and we say, you need an offensive-minded coach. Andy Reid, when he had Alex Smith, they lost in the first round to Mike Mularkey in 2017. And Mike Mularkey, they were such a bad team. He won a playoff game and got fired. So are we overanalyzing this defensive-minded thing? Is it really just as simple as find your quarterback, which the Texans may have an opportunity to do with that number 2 pick? I think that's something that we need to look at closely. I think that it will be looked at, but I think that it's not as simple as this guy's an offensive-minded coach. So this is what you gotta roll with. I think that's kind of a little bit necessary to look at, but I don't think it's the end-all be-all. I think a wise man once told me, one of my original mentors, it's all about the quarterback. And sometimes that's just what it is. It's not about defensive mind. It's not about offensive mind. It's all about the quarterback. Stability at quarterback is part of the reason Andy Reid left Philadelphia. Really part of the reason that Doug Peterson left Philadelphia. So does the defensive-minded, offensive-minded stuff matter as much, or are we thinking too much into it? That's something it's been one of the main talking points, and I'm sure that when DeMeco is in this interview with Nick Caserio, there's going to be questions about offensive philosophy. I'm going to tell you this. He's not Lovie Smith. He's a new age guy that consumes information. He lives football. He's not living in the Stone Age. So he will have an opinion on offense. Now, it could depend on personnel, which it should with any coach. But you're not going to have DeMeco Ryans go up there and say, yeah, we want to run the ball, 25 times a game, and, we want to blah, blah. No, he's not going to do that. But he will have a philosophy, and he will speak. He's very aware of the difference between defensive-minded, offensive-minded coaching. Staff is another thing that comes up. I think the staff thing is interesting. I actually think that's a weakness for Sean Payton. I think Sean Payton's going to bring in like older guys, some of his buddies like Vic Fangio and stuff. And look, a lot of the times the game just passes those guys by, and they're kind of living in the Stone Age. I actually think like the young guys, like the DeMeco Ryans, look, they're networking. They know guys. They're going to find guys you might not look at and know, but they're going to find guys, and they're going to develop those guys, and they're going to be the guys that are intriguing names down the line. I truly, truly believe that. You look at Nick Sirianni and you look at Brian Dable, and we like to mention them because they're in the conference championship, obviously. But those guys are very good at hiring staffs. Now, Wink Martindale called Mike Kafka, and then, Brian Dable called Wink Martindale, and then he called Mike Kafka. Kafka's already getting interviewed for gigs. Nick Sirianni has both of his coordinators getting interviewed for gigs. Those are the young guys, and I wouldn't consider Dable too young, but Sirianni, those are the young guys, the network, the guys that are just soaking up information, which is what Sirianni has done for a long time. I don't think the staff is going to be an issue for DeMeco Ryans. He's got a hell of a Rolodex. He's got a hell of a network. He's got a lot of respect. I don't, there's going to be opportunity for coaches. Like if you're a defensive coordinator or offensive coordinator or whatever, do you want to go coach with Sean Payton? Maybe, but how much are you going to get to do? How much are you going to really get to show what you do? I'm not saying Sean Payton's not going to be able to fill a staff. I'm just saying I wouldn't worry about that with DeMeco. So you have the pros, the prestige, the education, the it factor, and then you have the questions, offensive coach, staffing. And you have the interview today. It is D-Day. It's going to be fun. This is the locker room. It's always fun. Number one source for daily Texans digital content from someone as close as anyone that you will see or hear talking about this team Monday through Friday, about to go into the studio. It's going to be a fun Reaction Monday. Fire up the Odyssey app, the show of record around here. Turn it on. Listen on the Odyssey app. You can text in 713-572-4610. Leave the comments here, the likes, subscriptions. If you're a Texans fan, let's ride together. If you're not a Texans fan, it's one of the only places you can get that daily digital content. So you can soak in the misery that we often feel, and you can consume as much information as possible. Have a good one. It's going to be fun no matter what happens, whether it's DeMeco, Mike Kafka on Sunday. We'll probably do a video for that. And we'll try to localize the action this week. This has been the Locker Room. No matter what happens, though, we're always in this together. Have a good Friday. Have a good weekend, everyone.